Good evening all and welcome, we're back. More info on that at the end of the video. I also have a special call to any artists out there who would like to submit their work to be displayed on our Instagram. Feel free to send it over, I would love to show it. But for now it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. When I was very young, I lived in a house with my older brother and mum in Cincinnati, Ohio, and ever since I could remember, I would always see shadows outside my room that seemingly would stop and stare at me. When I turned 5, the activity started to target me and escalated further. I would have a reoccurring dream of laying in my bunk bed on the top bunk, playing Pokemon on my Game Boy Color, when I would see a man's hand come up from the side of my bed. Then it would grab me firmly on the leg in an attempt to pull me off the top bunk. That's when I would wake up and I'd see a mark on my leg, exactly where the hand had grabbed me. On other occasions, my closet doors would shake violently, and when I would call for my mum, they would immediately cease. The one thing that freaked me out the most happened when I was 6 years old. I was building a new Lego set in my basement with the door closed. My brother was on the second floor, and my mum was making dinner in the kitchen on the first floor. I was nearly finishing the Lego set, and the door creaked open. I looked up to see a man starting to descend the stairs. At first, I thought it may have been my mother's boyfriend, who is called Clark, but I immediately knew it wasn't him, since he stopped on the bottom staircase, and it looked nothing like Clark. This man then slowly began to turn his head towards me. When he did so, I screamed in horror, as half of his face was missing. It was very gory. It appeared his face had been blown off by something. He turned away from me and then walked into the laundry room and vanished. I ran upstairs crying for my mum, and all I could say was there was a bloody man in the basement. We moved out of that house when Clark and my mum got married. I was about 8 years old at the time. 3 years ago, when I was 20, I decided to investigate the history of that house, and I discovered that the owners before us lived with his brother in the house. Well, one evening they had an argument, which escalated and ended up with the brother shooting the homeowner in the master bedroom with a pistol, though the brother killed the owner in the bedroom. The brother then moved the owner into the bathroom, took a shotgun, and made it seem like the owner had taken his own life. That goes to explain why on that day I saw a man with half his face missing. This story is about my auntie, Mum's sister, her partner, and their daughter. They moved into their home in the early 90s. It was built back in the 1930s and hadn't had any major work done to it before they bought it. The first plan of action for my auntie's partner was to knock down some of the walls on the ground floor to open it up and fix all the ceilings in the bedrooms on the first floor. There was a leak in the roof, which meant that all the ceilings were warped and bowed and marked with damp, so he ripped all of it off until it was just exposed rafters and then put new ceiling boards up. This meant that while his work was being done, the loft space was completely empty. Once all the work was done, they could make the house their own. They had a good few months' worth of lovely new home vibes. But one night, my auntie woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of someone closing the kitchen cupboards quite loudly. Not slamming them shut, more like someone not bothering to take into account that someone else was asleep. Her partner was asleep next to her, so she assumed it was my cousin pottering around down there. My cousin was around 15 at the time, so it didn't surprise my aunt that she wasn't exactly considerate when getting her late-night snacks. She muttered a few words of annoyance and went back to sleep. The banging of the doors continued sporadically for the rest of the night. The next morning, my aunt goes downstairs quite tired from not sleeping too well because of the noise, to find my cousin eating her breakfast at the kitchen table. "I'm surprised you're up so early, considering you were banging about the place all night," my aunt says to my cousin. "What do you mean? I didn't get up last night. I slept right through." My auntie then gets this wave of panic. Who was banging around last night? There was no sign of anything being out of place or disturbed, and all the perimeter doors and windows were locked and undamaged. After a bit of arguing regarding who was walking around with no one owning up to it, my auntie comes to the conclusion that it must have been a particularly vivid dream, and they go about their day. A few weeks pass and it happens again. My auntie is awoken in the middle of the night by the occasional sound of cupboard doors banging shut in the kitchen. This time, she gets up and goes down to investigate, but there's nothing. No one is awake, and nothing looks out of place. At this point, my aunt is getting seriously creeped out. She tries to reason that maybe it's the neighbors, and the sound is being carried through the house because it's always much quieter at night and easier to hear things. But this gets dismissed when my auntie's partner points out that they are semi-detached, and the neighbor's kitchen is on the wrong side of the house for that to be the cause of the noise. The banging is definitely coming from below them, in the kitchen, rather than off to one side of the house where the neighbor's kitchen would be. This carries on for a good while. Every week or so, there comes a night where one of them is awoken by sporadic banging. They go to investigate, nothing, and return to bed. Now, a quick digression. My aunt sometimes goes to a medium. She goes to see if she can get messages from relatives who have passed on. Sometimes she gets told spooky accurate stuff, other times it's way off the mark. One time she goes and sees, and this is deep during the period when the banging is going on, but she doesn't mention any of this to the medium. She's always careful, very careful not to say anything or give away any visual clues to whichever medium she's seeing, because she wants to believe and all that, and doesn't want the niggling doubt that she had actually fed the answers to the medium. She's got a great poker face. The medium is talking to her about messages they're receiving, stuff about her career, her partner, which turned out to be true, cheating dirtbag, and then the medium randomly starts talking about her house. How she's been there for a while now, but there's someone in the house who isn't happy. Someone who doesn't like what they've done to the layout. My auntie is confused. She assumes that the medium is talking about her partner or my cousin, but the medium continues. "Check the loft," the medium says. "There's something in the loft." Now this creeps my auntie out even more. She knows that nothing is in the loft. They've never gone up there since moving because everything that was in there they put in the garage when they arrived. So her partner could redo the ceilings, but they never got around to moving all the stuff from the garage to the loft again. So she goes home and tells her partner about how there's supposed to be something in the loft, but not about what she was told about him cheating on her one day, self-fulfilling prophecy and all that. And he gets the ladder and goes up there. There's a period of quiet while he looks around with a torch and then goes, "Holy crap." He comes back down the ladder chute, clutching a piece of paper. "I found this lying on one of the rafters," he says. It's a photograph. A black and white photograph of a woman in her 50s, and she looks pissed, very stern, and it gives all of them the creeps, especially when my auntie's partner insists there's no way it couldn't have been there when he found it. He would have seen it when he was redoing all the ceilings. They cannot work it out, so my auntie rings the old owner. They have a chat, and my auntie describes the woman in the photo. The old owner is able to deduce that it's a picture of his mum. Turns out she died in that house back in the 80s, and he inherited it and continued to live there until he sold it to my aunt's family. Now this gives my auntie a serious case of heebie-jeebies. She puts the phone down and then says out loud that she's sorry if the new layout isn't to the old lady's liking, but they just have to get on with it now. A few nights pass and there's no more noise. But then they're all awoken by the most awful sound of pots and pans being thrown on the floor. They run downstairs, but there's nothing to account for what caused the noise, but my aunt describes it like no noise she's ever heard before. It was just awful. She scans the kitchen counters. Where's the photo of the old woman? Her partner tells her that he threw it away in the morning. My auntie erupts. Get the photo out of the bin now. He dutifully retrieves it, and she tries to smooth out the creases and apologizes out loud. The photo is put in one of the kitchen drawers and then goes back to bed. After that, my aunt would still get woken up every now and then by the sound of the cupboard doors banging, but she never went to investigate. It was just the old woman voicing her displeasure again. They moved out a few years ago and left a note to the new owner, saying to leave the photo in the kitchen drawer. When I was about 10, and my sister Kat 7, we lived in Illinois. Our family, being my mum, dad, 2 brothers and Kat, went to visit Grandma Ruth for Christmas. She was my dad's mother, who lived in Alabama. One night we went up on Cumberland Mountain to see my great-grandmother Bessie, and Kat and I were napping in her feather bed, when I felt her sit up and she started talking. We shared a bed at home, and sometimes she would talk in her sleep. I asked her who she was talking to. Without looking at me, she just said, "Willie." "Who's Willie?" I asked. "He's right there, at the foot of the bed." I couldn't see anyone. "He's wearing a red flannel shirt and overalls with curly hair," she added. Still looking towards the end of the bed, she said, "Okay," then laid back down and went to sleep. I got up and told Dad and Grandma Bessie, who were in her living room, what had just happened. They looked at each other and said quietly, "She's got it." I found out later that "it" referred to being sensitive to spirits. Kat got up and stood in the bedroom doorway and told Bessie, "Willie says he loves you, but he has to go now." Not 15 minutes later, there was a knock on her front door. It was a despondent young man in his 20s who lived with his family down the road. He told us that his son had just passed away from a fever. He would take naps in her feather bed when Bessie sometimes watched him. His name was Willie. That was our first taste of the paranormal. Kat, it turned out, is as sensitive, like a magnet for spirits. This incident began her long-life relationship with visitors from the other side, and it's been anything but fun for her. In the 1960s to early 70s, my family and I lived in a 3-street neighborhood between a soybean farm in Kakoya Mound State Park in Illinois, and it was a great place for kids. There were always a bunch of us who would go and gather in the park to play, climb the burial mounds, and monk mounds. Archaeological students from Southern Illinois University were always at the park digging here and there. Look it up. It's very interesting. There were signs at the base of some of the mounds warning against climbing them, as the tops could become unstable. But being kids, we did so anyway, and nothing ever happened to us. All the neighborhood homes are gone now, having been bought by the state to build cultural centers to expand the park back in the 1980s, I believe. When I was about 12, I was home from school on this particular day. I had a bad head cold, and my sister and brothers were in school, while my parents were at work. It was January. Over the weekend it had snowed enough to cause some driving problems, but not nearly enough to call a snow day from school. As I headed to the kitchen for some water, I glanced out my bedroom window facing my backyard. My dad had planted 2 weeping willow trees there. Their long tendrils gently swayed in the breeze, green and beautiful. As I was looking out, I saw a young Native American woman, probably in her late teens or early 20s, walking across our backyard about 50 feet from the house. I wasn't frightened. I was used to seeing and hearing things. The woman was wearing a fringed and beaded buckskin dress, her long hair dark and braided, and she carried what appeared to be a sheaf of wheat in her arms, heading towards one of the willows. I waved. She stopped and turned her head towards me and cocked it slightly, as if to comprehend what she was seeing, then continued onto her walk, disappearing into the slightly swaying green willow branches. That's when I realized it was the middle of winter. I rubbed my eyes and opened them again. The outside was still blanketed in about 6 inches of snow, with steel grey clouds peppering the skyline and a whisper of a breeze. What did I just see? A glimpse into the past of my neighborhood? It wasn't a dream because I hadn't been asleep. I'd been reading a book on horses, and at that moment I didn't care. I was just thirsty, but I didn't tell anyone. It was just one of those occasional things. When I turned 15, we had moved and my mum bought a small statue about a foot tall for my birthday. It looked exactly like the woman I'd seen a few years prior, and I still have it. In 1988, while living with my parents in a house in Oklahoma City suburbs, I was in my room with my niece, finding a book for her to read. She and my sister were visiting. We heard a glass-like crash from the kitchen. We hurried into the room and found a small ceramic cow butter dish that was used to house a stick of butter that I had made in ceramics class that I had taken with my sister a few years earlier. The base of the butter dish was still sitting on the shelf, but the top was 6 feet away where it had shattered on the tiled floor. They called out, "What was that?" And we looked at each other and let out nervous giggles and went into the den to tell my parents and sister that we have a ghost. Now I can hear a lot of listeners of this next account call BS. And you know what? I probably would have too, if I hadn't have been there. In 2001, shortly after my husband John and I were married, we were watching NASCAR race on TV one Sunday afternoon. Lucky, my cockapoo I got from my dad a few years before I met John, was lying on the couch between us. A few hours earlier, I had unpacked books, knickknacks, and about 100 videotapes, 97 to be precise, as this was before we got DVDs. The tapes were arranged alphabetically on the top 2 shelves of a 4-shelf bookcase in our spare bedroom. I used it to set up a library and small studio for my artwork. A bookworm and artist in residence. I was taking a break from unpacking when suddenly an orb about 5 feet off the floor, the size of a basketball, yellow, whitey, orangey in color, and sparkling and cracking a 6-foot trail behind it, came from the hallway to our right and passed in front of us. It quickly turned and went back into the hallway that led to the kitchen, the bathrooms, and the 2 bedrooms. As we watched this orb in amazement, we looked at each other and saw that Lucky had witnessed it too. A few seconds after, we heard a loud crash from the spare bedroom. Lucky whined, but refused to budge. As John and I rushed in to find all the videotapes lying face down in a pile on the floor. These tapes were set a good 8 inches from the front edge of the shelves. All of the tapes were out of their sleeves, facing down in the pile, except for one lying on top. There were no open windows that would let in a strong breeze. No one else was in the house to prank us. No earthquake would have shaken all the tapes onto the floor. And how, on God's green earth, could all the tapes get out of their sleeves and end up piled 3 feet from the bookcase in a matter of seconds? Amid the alphabetized tape sleeves still on the bookcase shelves, one empty slot was evident. It was where the sleeved, front-facing videotape on the pile should have been. It was Ghost. That night I dreamed of a girl about 8 years old, wearing a long, yellow flowered dress. Her piercing blue eyes were bright under her blonde curls, and she said her name was Sarah, and that she used to live here a long time ago. Then she was gone, and I awoke to the hardy scent of lavender. I don't care for the fragrance, it messes with my sinuses, so that was a bit weird. It faded soon after, and I didn't have another incident in that house. Next, my sister had moved into my room after I got married, and experienced many occurrences of stomping, wall banging, voices, things being moved, and as I mentioned before, she's as sensitive. Prior to moving in with our parents, Kat had lived in an apartment not far from our house. I gave her a small digital voice-automated recorder when she told me she had been hearing things in the apartment. She had captured some outrageously creepy things on it. Well, one weekend, my older brother and his 3 children were spending the night with her while visiting from out of state. Still dark outside, he was awoken by a pressure on the couch where he was sleeping. Thinking it was one of the children, he woke up to find no one. Everyone was still asleep. He bolted up, rushed into Kat's room, and told her, quite rattled, "I can't stay here. It's haunted," and that they had all got to get out of there. She was startled awake, confused, until he told her what had happened. They packed up and left in minutes, and went to our parents' house a few blocks away. He refused to ever return to that apartment. Kat got recordings of a man in her room at our parents' house. One afternoon, she was getting ready to run some errands, and switched the recorder on as she was leaving. She saw the blinds in her windows move. 2 slats were separated in 2 places, as if someone were peering out. One was the height of a small child, the other, that of an adult. She peeled out the driveway upon returning, and the recorder was still on. Playback revealed sounds of someone rummaging and slamming drawers, but nothing had been moved. She got a recording of a small boy saying, "I won't be home for dinner," and a man's deep, gravelly voice saying, "She's mine." Every time we listen back to it, it still creeps us out. These stories occurred in 2016. I was a hardcore atheist at the time. I was raised Baptist and was never allowed to have a Ouija board growing up. So after becoming atheist, I decided to buy one just for the fun of it, still believing that any movement would be the result of the ideomotor effect. I played around with it and not much happened. So I just put it back in the box and shoved it under mine and my boyfriend's bed. 2 or 3 nights later, I woke up to what sounded like a violent scratching/clawing noise and what felt like the bed shaking. And you know, when you wake up because you think you heard something and you hold your breath and you can hear better in the silence? Well, that's what I did. I held my breath terrified, and it was strange because it was almost waiting for me to let my guard down. Because as soon as I exhaled and thought, "Oh, it was just a dream," the scratching and clawing picked up again. It was so forceful. It was shaking the freaking bed with each and every scratch. So I obviously freaked the hell out and wake up my boyfriend, who was asleep next to me, while the scratching paused again. As soon as I shook him awake, he could tell I was terrified just by the look on my face. He started to ask me what was wrong, and I just shushed him and whispered, "Shh, listen. Just tell me if you hear it too." We're both sitting there in silence, and once again, it was as if it was just waiting for us to lower our guard, because as soon as my boyfriend said, "Hear what? I don't hear," the scratching suddenly picked up 10 times harder and faster and louder than before. My boyfriend was braver than I was, and he immediately hopped out of bed and turned the light on while yelling, "What the hell was that?" As soon as light flooded into the room, it stopped. I immediately looked for a rational cause. There were no animals in there at the time, no kids, no TV or radio on. We lived in a brick house, so nothing could get in the walls, by ourselves and in the suburbs, so no weird animals or anything like that. There was no explanation we could fathom. My boyfriend looked under the bed. He looked all around the house. He even looked around the outside of the house, just trying to find some logical explanation, but there was nothing. So my boyfriend and I eventually get back into bed. We snuggled up close, and then he reached over and turned the light off. As we laid there, we listened for any hint of movement. And of course, as soon as my boyfriend relaxes and says, "I think it's gone now," the scratching and clawing started to pick up even more violently than before. At that point, we turned every single light on in the house and went and slept in the living room. This second experience happened a few months after the first. My boyfriend was a very heavy smoker. He would literally wake up every few hours throughout the night to go outside on the back patio and light up a cigarette. I'm a light sleeper. I would often wake up when he went out to smoke, and then wake up again when he came in from smoking, and crawled back into bed. It was around 2 a.m., and I heard my boyfriend get up from bed. So I'm trying to fall back asleep, and I hear him put his shoes on, open and close the bedroom door, and hear his footsteps recede down the hallway. I hear him open and shut the hallway door. I hear him open and shut the back door, and I hear the back screen door open and shut too. Totally normal, noises I anticipate and expect. I don't know how much time passed, probably not that long because I never fell back asleep, when I then heard the screen door open and shut again, along with the back door. I heard the door at the end of the hallway open and shut too, and footsteps walking down the hallway towards the bedroom. A bit heavier this time, as if he was stomping, trying to be loud for some reason. Then I hear our bedroom door open and shut. Normally at this point I would hear my boyfriend crawling onto his side of the bed, as he slept right next to the door, while I slept on the other side of the wall, with my back to the door. But instead, I hear him still stomping around and walking around the bed, and walk up to my side, all the way to the desk, and stopping right there, standing right in front of my face. My eyes were still shut, and I was lying on my side facing where he was standing but trying to fall back asleep. I figured maybe he was putting his phone to charge as the outlet is by my pillow. But I don't hear him messing around with the cell phone charger cable. I don't hear anything. I suddenly felt like there was someone just staring at me, watching me. That's when the terrifying thought crossed my mind. Why is he standing there, in front of me doing nothing, except watching me sleep? And I got this sinking feeling in my stomach. Then I hear a voice whisper my name, telling me to wake up. It almost sounded like my boyfriend, but the voice was deeper and raspy, and almost distorted. I opened my eyes, and despite hearing him walk in and open and close the doors and walk around to my side, there's no one there. But it gets creepier. I freak out, jump out of bed, and run down the hall to find my boyfriend. And once I turn a corner to go running through the living area where the exit to the back patio is, I run into my boyfriend. Turns out he was in the process of running inside to find me, while I was in the process of running outside to find him. Before I can even gather my thoughts to turn them into words, he goes, "Where were you? Are you okay? Did you hear it?" I don't know what happened. I came out for a smoke and I guess I must have fallen asleep in the hammock or something, because the next thing I know I hear the patio door and screen door open and shut, and it half woke me up. So I was still half asleep, but I heard you wake up and I felt you sit down on the hammock with me and put your hand on my leg. Then I heard you say my name and you yelled at me to wake up, and it sounded like you, but I knew it wasn't you. And when I opened my eyes, there was no one there. And I looked around and I didn't see you, so I panicked. So, long story short, we both had the same unique experience at the same time in different areas of the house. Both of us thinking at first it was the other person, only for us to realize, also at the exact same time, no one was there at all. Which begs the question, who did both of us hear walking through the halls, patios, and bedrooms, if it wasn't either of us? This next story happened about 5 months after that. Since that experience, I had actually made a lot of progress on the Ouija board, and you could say I befriended the spirit of the house, Grillo, as we call him. It's a long story, but basically, I told it out loud. If you wanted to stay in the house, you could make all the noise you wanted during the day, but not at night because it scares the crap out of me. Take it or leave it. And it worked. I worked hard to communicate over time and build a rapport of sorts with it. But these are stories for another day. The point is, the spirit was no longer terrifying us and became more of a welcomed, although prankster sort of presence. But keep in mind, in my head, I still partially believed I was just going insane, and that none of this was real. Imagination, mental illness, idiomotor effect, gas leak, brain tumor, something rational. The atheism was strong in me. Around this time, my boyfriend, who had been in long-term recovery from heroin addiction, ended up relapsing. I knew it, as I was in long-term recovery myself and knew all the signs, but he wouldn't admit it. I knew the only way he would admit it and go back to rehab is if I found evidence and confronted him with it. When he left for work one night, I knew it was a chance to gather evidence. He would never take syringes to work with him, so I knew they had to be in the house somewhere. I searched for several hours, and I was frantic. But after finding nothing, I was in tears, sobbing and desperate. So I had an idea. In absolute desperation, still in tears, energy still very high, I pulled out the Ouija board and thought, this is my last shot. Here goes nothing. While also at the same time kind of viewing it as a test to see if my paranormal experiences were legit, or if I somehow was making them up in my own head. Once I contacted the prankster spirit, I asked if he had seen or would know the location of something my boyfriend had hidden recently within the house, like perhaps a baggie or syringes. When the planchette again went to yes, I broke down and straight up said, "Please, I need your help. I need to know where he hid those items so I can save his life. I swear to God, if you help me find those items, I will never ask you to find anything or do anything for me again. Please, where should I look?" I'll admit, I felt like a crazy person, but to my surprise, it started to spell out a list of words. It spelled out basket, basement, trouser, laundry, fleece, sock, pocket. Then the energy died out. Again, that atheist out in the back of my mind, thinking the ideomotor effect, thought that a strange list from my subconscious to spell out. I don't even use the word trouser, and we don't own anything fleece. To skip the boring part, I searched for 90 minutes straight and was about to give up. But then, while in the laundry room of the basement, I saw a basket underneath the rocking chair that I hadn't noticed before. It was a box of pants, or you might say trousers, all belonging to my boyfriend. I dug through and got to the last pair of trousers in that basket under the chair in the laundry room of the basement. It was in a pair of jeans. And I kid you not, in the pocket, I pulled out a fleece, a sock that I had never seen before. And wrapped inside the sock, I found 2 syringes and several empty gel capsules. What dope comes in around here? Once I saw that, a shiver went down my spine because I realized everything was actually real. The truth of spirits and the afterlife had hit me in the face like a ton of bricks. I wasn't just crazy after all. That was my proof that spirits were real, because I could have never have known that. Not a single word was incorrect from the Ouija board. Like I suddenly got the most terrified feeling ever, just knowing that the spirit I talked to was real, and was now certainly watching me make this discovery. Watching me stand there frozen in fear and awe and realization as I looked around the basement, and I thanked it. And yes, that discovery did propel my boyfriend and eventually fiancé into treatment, but unfortunately, in late 2017 my fiancé relapsed one more time and passed away. But thanks to that spirit I got to spend a few more sober years with him, otherwise I would have lost him before then. So anyway, these are my biggest and most life-changing experiences with the paranormal. I know what I experienced and won't waste a single second trying to convince anyone who won't believe me. All I know is that it was enough to convince me. When I was young, my grandfather rented us a movie to watch, Dirty Dancing. He shut off the movie pretty quickly once he realized it wasn't super appropriate for a 7-year-old. Fast forward a few years after he passed away. I was homesick and my mum rented me a VHS to watch. You guessed it, Dirty Dancing. I remember not having seen past the part he shut it off, and as soon as I got to that part, the VHS ejected. I'm 29 now, and haven't seen the full movie out of respect. When I was 3, my parents and I were on vacation to Canada and staying with my great uncle. He lived in an older downtown Toronto home. He had a finished basement, and that's where all the adults were when I was put to bed. I remember I felt afraid in that room and had trouble falling asleep. At some point I opened my eyes, and standing at the end of the bed was an old woman. She was wearing a purple dress with white flowers all over it, and she was glowing with a greyish hue around her. She had her hair done in a big bun, with one hand on her hip and the other wagging a finger at me, and asked in an angry voice, "What are you doing in my room?" She was upset, and I dove under the covers. After a while, I worked up the courage to take a peek, but she was gone. I left the room and made my way down to the basement. They were all surprised when I'd come downstairs, and my mother asked me what was up. I asked her who the woman was in my room. I remember they all looked at me with a puzzled look. I told them what I had experienced, and my great aunt pulled out a photo album and started showing me pictures. I pointed to a woman and said, "That's her." Turns out it was my great aunt's mother. That was her room, and she had passed away in her sleep years before in that very place. My mother stayed with me that night. She didn't sleep a wink and didn't experience a damn thing. My grandpa passed away 3 years ago due to pneumonia. The day before his death, he was in the hospital, and me and my brother and my uncle were outside his room. It was around midnight when my brother and uncle went to a store near the hospital to get something to eat, and I was there alone and dozed off on the bench for 10 minutes, and when I woke up I saw an old woman leave my grandpa's room. So I rushed in to check on him, and he was sleeping. I came out and saw the woman walking towards the exit, and I couldn't see her face, but she was wearing the same clothes that my grandma was wearing the day she passed away, 5 years before this very incident. My mother died when I was 16, suffered 4 years with ovarian cancer that just destroyed her. Very bad home life, mostly because of her husband. My stepdad at the time, he sucked. My mom and I didn't get close till the very end. Within the year following her death, I was living with my biological father and my big brother. He was home from college, and we loved paranormal stuff and watched all the cringy shows like Ghost Adventures before it was quite so crazy in 2011. We were watching Zack Be Weird one night when Dad was at work, and I went to the kitchen to steal a bite of ice cream. I didn't want a bowl, just a bite, so I did it with a spoon. I went back and kept watching. Later on, I went back again and found a fork mark in the ice cream. Mind you, the ice cream had recently melted when left out and gotten refrozen, so it was smooth except for the spoon and fork mark. Weird. I asked my brother if he'd stolen a bite, but we knew he hadn't moved. I got real suspicious and snapped a picture and put it back. 10 minutes later, I went back and found a chocolatey fork on the counter and another mark in the ice cream. I flipped out because I was sure someone had broken in and was in the basement stairwell by the kitchen stealing food when we weren't looking. We checked the whole house, but there were no signs of entry, and everything was locked. Then, we remembered something. Our mother used to eat ice cream with a fork. She was the only one. As soon as we started discussing the idea, the living room lamps flicker and the entire house filled with the smell of Calvin Klein's Obsession, which was my mother's favorite perfume, as well as her mother's. The only bottle we had was in my car. We smell her every once in a while. We think she comes to visit us occasionally. I'm a metalhead. When I was younger, I was really a metalhead, and I loved devilish stuff. One day I put a picture of Baphomet, the goat human-looking thing with wings, as the wallpaper on my phone. I thought it was cool. Later on that night, around 3:30 in the morning, I was in bed listening to metal, specifically Merciful Fate by Metallica, when weird things started. First, I heard sort of like a whisper in my ear that wouldn't go away. I was trying to make sense of it, and told myself it was probably the wind blowing through my house, and the one next door, as the houses were pretty close together. I said that to myself, but I still blasted the fan, so all I could hear was that. Then I started to hear nails on a chalkboard. This time I told myself it was probably the mice in between the walls, but I was getting more freaked out by the minute. That's when the banging on the walls started, which I credited to perhaps the boiler, but I was already crapping myself at this point, and covered head to toe in my blanket. I then called my mum. I want to mention that I'm from the Dominican Republic, so is my mum, and she's from a province that borders Haiti, so she grew up dealing and hearing about paranormal stuff. She isn't afraid of anything, and believe it or not, I've seen her performing exorcisms twice. But going back to that night, I called her to my room and didn't say anything other than come to my room. When she opened the door to my room, she immediately got goosebumps and started saying there was an evil in my room. She started saying stuff like, "Leave my house and my son," and started throwing holy water everywhere. I proceeded to sleep with my mum for the next week. I practice Stoic philosophy and consider myself a pretty honest guy, and I'm telling you this happened to me. I'm also a firm believer in science, and as much as I tried to find an explanation for what was going on, I couldn't find a reason for my mum saying that without me uttering a word as to what I believed was going on at the time. This is one of the weirdest things that's ever happened to me. My grandma gave me her husband's car, a '62 Fury, shortly before she passed away, so I had no clue how to start a car at the time, let alone drive it with a stick on the column. So the car was left in a garage some 7 years until a friend offered to help me out, and we spent almost 2 years going in and out trying to fire it up to no avail. The car would crank but not start at all, fire up but shut down immediately, and all the time both were trying to make it run and it just wouldn't, as if the car didn't want to. Then Corona came, and one day, out of the boringness, we went into the garage, keys in hand, and boosted on the battery as my friend and I did 100 times. We put the key in, cranked it, and it started as if it was parked there just yesterday. It was idle and left running for over an hour. Then out of nowhere, the smell of Grandpa's cologne filled up the whole house so much that my mum came out and said, "It's like he came back to see you drive it." So I think Grandpa didn't like my friend and was protecting his car and would only make it run with someone from the family. Hey guys, it's Mort here. Thank you so very, very much for listening. I do appreciate you guys coming back to tonight's video, and thank you for everyone who voted and selected this topic. Do love me a good ghost story. I would like to say that I am sorry for the lack of views. I'm going to be fully honest with you. I had our yearly, we had our vacation this year, and I tried to get as much in advance as I could, but I couldn't really get ahead in advance, and I managed to whack out a few comps. And it was my birthday week, so yeah, I really just wanted a bit of time off. That's why there was a definite lack of uploads. And I feel like I say this way too often, but no, the uploads will be back now. I do have a mountain of work since I've left, but I'm really looking forward to tackling it, really. Also, yeah, well, that's it. I really hope that all of you are good. Yeah, good things looking forward. Gonna have heaps more content for you, so, I hope that you're willing to listen. I'm also interested in finding out, do you guys listen to this while you're awake or mostly while you're asleep? Because I'm guessing if you're asleep right now, you're definitely not hearing this. Interesting questions. I think I'm going to wrap things up here though, guys. I'm definitely going to see you on Friday, so I look forward to seeing you there. Thank you all so much again for tuning in. But for now, stay awesome, and I will see you in the next one.